Our name is a fundamental pillar of our identity. From a cultural point of view, names carry tradition, history, and collective values. This applies personally and collectively. After studying so many human groups to develop almost 1,400 videos on my channel, it really catches my attention. Those vanished peoples whose names were adopted by their conquerors. Can you imagine that your killer not only takes your life but also takes your name? Are you interested in learning about 5 cases of identity theft throughout history? Okay, stay until the video ends. The Uruguay national soccer team breaks all the molds. A country with 3 million inhabitants with 15 Copa America titles and 2 World Cups. Sorry kids, but the Olympics don't count. Anyway, the Charrúas are real soccer legends. The problem is that the name of the original Charrúas holds a sad story, completely off the field. The Charrúas were a group of indigenous peoples from the Rio de la Plata Basin who resisted the Spanish and Portuguese expansions. Since the 16th century, they were victims of wars, displacement, and diseases brought by the colonizers. By the early 19th century, the Charrúa population had dramatically decreased to just a few hundred, and they were only present in the eastern bank of the Rio de la Plata, which is present-day Uruguay. After the country's independence, the first president, Fructuoso Rivera, organized the Salsipuedes massacre. This consisted of an ambush against the last Charrúas, many of whom died in combat. Those who survived were imprisoned or sent to work as servants. Others mixed with the Creole population, being culturally assimilated. In conclusion, it is a people that gradually disappeared, and their final blow was dealt by the Uruguayan government. Anyway, the word Charrúa came to have connotations of courage, strength, and pride for Uruguayans. Warrior. Thus, the expression Charrúa Claw became established during the 1935 South American Championship in Peru and culminated with Uruguay's victory over Argentina. To this day, Uruguayans use names of Charrúa origin like Yamandu, Tabaré, or Yandé. Therefore, inherently, modern Uruguayans have adopted part of the identity of the vanished Charrúa people. If you've seen any of the countless videos I've made about Germany, you already know that it's a country that was born from the unification of various German states, with the Kingdom of Prussia centered in Berlin as its core. Although Germans consider Prussia to be their origin, the original Prussians would protest. And I'll spoil it for you. This story is the perfect definition of what goes around comes around. The ancient Prussians were an ethnic group originally from the area located between the Niemen and Vistula rivers, between what is now Lithuania, Poland, and Kaliningrad, who spoke a language of Baltic origin, in other words, the lost cousins of today's Lithuanians and Latvians. How would you know? The Balts were the last pagans in Europe, on a continent where Christianization was advancing by leaps and bounds. That's why the Pope authorized the Teutonic Order, a German religious military order, to carry out the Baltic Crusades. After founding their own state, the Teutonic Knights began a forced Christianization of the Prussians, imposing baptism and destroying their old pagan temples. The German language became the language of administration, gradually assimilating the Prussian language until it disappeared around the 17th century. By the 16th century, the Teutonic Order was secularized, so it needed a new name, and what better than to take the name of that assimilated people. Thus, the Duchy of Prussia was born with its capital in Königsberg, which gained power and importance until it entered into a dynastic union with Brandenburg, centered in Berlin, and which rose to become the Kingdom of Prussia. The ironic thing about this story is that after World War I, the name was relegated to that of the province of East Prussia, which still had Königsberg as its capital. During World War II, the Soviets defeated the Germans, and what was left of Prussia was divided between the Poles and the Russians. The historical core of the Germans, which was founded on the theft of Baltic identity, was turned into the Russian city of Kaliningrad. Well, the world sure goes around. The greatest power of all time, the British Empire is based on the English, who settled in the British Isles, but their Anglo-Saxon origins come from what is now Denmark. The original Britons were actually a Celtic people who inhabited the island since at least the 5th century before Christ. Their extinct language is related to modern Welsh and Breton, which are spoken in Brittany, a region of present-day France. The Romans arrived in Britannia around 43 AD, and although they conquered much of the island, Romanization only took place in the southeast. In what is now Wales, Cornwall, and Scotland, Celtic culture and identity remained alive. The Britons' downfall began with the Anglo-Saxon arrival in the 5th century AD. The invaders founded their own kingdoms, pushed the British populations to the peripheral areas, and imposed a rather radical Anglo-Saxonization. The Britons were then reduced to the tiny minorities who today speak the dying languages of Welsh and Cornish. Interestingly, the Anglo-Saxons never called themselves Britons but rather English, especially since the reign of Athelstan. However, the prestige of the name Britannia, coined by the Romans, survived in the imagination. With the union of Scotland and England in 1707, the new state adopted the name of the Kingdom of Great Britain, reappropriating the Celtic term even though the original Breton people had already been assimilated for several centuries. Since we're talking about the Celts, they were not only in the British Isles, but also in much of Central and Western Europe, especially in what is now France, where they were known as Gauls. The Romans began the conquest of Gaul around 120 before Christ, and it was consolidated in 51 before Christ after the campaigns of Julius Caesar. The Romans then do what they do best: Romanize everything. Latin was imposed as the dominant language, along with their political and religious system, but at the same time, they respected the provincial aristocracies, who were granted Roman citizenship. The result was the creation of the Gallo-Roman identity, that is, Latinized Celts who spoke a language that eventually became French. When Rome fell, Gaul was invaded by Germanic peoples, mainly the Franks, who founded a tremendous empire that reached its zenith during the era of Charlemagne. Unlike the Romans, the Franks respected the Gallo-Roman identity and did not try to impose their language, which was limited to the political and military elite. And this is where the paradox occurs. Although the Gaulish language disappeared around the 6th century AD, its name survived for geographical reasons, since the Romans gave this name to several provinces, because of the prestige that some Gallo-Roman authors had during the Middle Ages, and because of French nationalism, which exalted the Gauls as their direct ancestors. As for the Franks, who were of Germanic origin, their empire was divided shortly after Charlemagne's death into 3 Frankish kingdoms. The Western Frankish kingdom became the foundation of present-day France, and the only one of the 3 that kept the name, which also shouldn't be directly associated with the current French, even though they put Charlemagne's statue next to the Notre Dame Cathedral. Lombardy is an Italian region that stands out because of its flag, which looks like the Nickelodeon symbol. Vegan version, and its capital is the famous and elegant city of Milan. In addition, it has its own language, Lombard, which is quite similar to Standard Italian, and is also spoken in the canton of Ticino in Switzerland and in the town of Botuvera, Santa Catarina, Brazil. However, at one time, there was a Lombard language that wouldn't have been understood by the Azzurri, but by the Germans. Let's go back to the Middle Ages, to the middle of the 6th century. One of the many Germanic groups, the Lombards, managed to found their own kingdom after gaining independence from the Eastern Roman Empire. At their height, they spread across almost all of what is now northern Italy and had Pavia as their capital, a city in present-day Lombardy. After 2 centuries, the Lombards lost their sovereignty to the kingdom of the Franks, led by Charlemagne. After this, a process of linguistic and cultural assimilation began. The Lombardic Germanic language disappeared around the 10th century, however, the name survived. The prestige of the former kingdom and the continued presence of Lombard nobility in local positions kept the name alive. Over the centuries, the term became established as an Italian regional identity, which eventually gave its name to the Gallo-Italic variant, and by extension to the region of Lombardy. Anyway, these have been the 5 stolen identities for today. History shows us that names don't always die with the peoples who bore them. Sometimes the victors take them for themselves to legitimize their power or create a new identity. Ironically, in these attempts to erase a human group, their memories remain engraved in the word that survives. What other case of identity appropriation do you know of throughout history? Don't forget to leave your comment and subscribe to the channel. I'm adding my social media links in the description. And if you want to watch the new videos at premiere and have more interaction with me, your donations on Patreon, Unamanito.net, or channel memberships are welcome. See you next time.